Hey everyone, Boletsky here. I've been a Fire Emblem nut ever since middle school, and the newest installment, Fire Emblem Engage, is really good. But there's one thing that really bothers me about the discourse online. Forewarning, this will be for Maddening mode and include the DLC, so I know a lot of people don't like that. Sucks to suck. That's how I play. Anyway, let's get into it. Alfred gets a lot of flack on tier lists I've seen, where he usually sits at bottom tier, sometimes all by himself as the worst unit in the game. I took a look at his stats and was in disbelief, since his bases are fine aside from his shaky speed, and his growth rates are amazing. I mean, his growths include 80 HP, 55 strength, 45 speed, 60 defense, and isn't lacking in the other stats either. How can he be bad? He has to be a strong growth unit. I was determined to prove all the haters wrong. This unit is clearly a hidden gem. To preface my findings, I'd say I was half right and half wrong. Alfred suffers from two issues and has an amazing strength that are all improved by Sigurd's ring, making him the best user of it. His speed and build are terrible, but Sigurd gives him +2 build, which shores up the penalty he suffers, making his speed just high enough to stop getting doubled except by weak sword fighters, which, as we'll get to, he doesn't care about. His strength is also a little shaky, but momentum and a +1 steel lance with Marth's engraving had him consistently one-shotting squishy enemies like mages all throughout the early game, especially in engage mode. Sigurd's Rider's Bane with momentum also let him one-shot cavalry, often from over 8, 10, or even 12 spaces away in engage mode, since being cavalry gives him a total of 12 move. Alfred's greatest strength, however, is his perfect defense, and I really mean perfect. This is some Goldilocks stuff. With Sigurd's ring and a single Draco shield, Alfred's defense is just high enough to make him take only a couple points of damage from sword fighters and not too much from stronger enemies like axe fighters, even if he gets broken. This alongside with Cantor makes him ideal for pulling enemies, as he doesn't suffer the same problem as Louis where weaker enemies will just deal 0 damage and therefore ignore him. It's an incredibly useful niche to have as it makes early chapters so much easier, since even with Alfred's less than ideal strength, he deals enough damage on retaliation to make cleaning up the units he pulls easy. A common argument I've heard is that Alfred doesn't deserve Sigurd's ring, since units like Louis and Chloe use him much better. I disagree. Louis and Chloe are both great units, however neither of them gain much from Sigurd. Louis, when given the boots from the early DLC drop, no longer suffers from his only downside, and he has no use for the additional defense or build, since he already suffers from enemies ignoring him and has enough build, not to mention he doesn't really care about speed. In theory, he can do tons of work by dashing around the map in engage mode, although that might not work in Maddening where enemies will simply ignore him, but my point is that Louis doesn't need it to be a great and useful unit, whereas Alfred goes from mediocre at best to excellent with the addition of Sigurd's ring. I'd rather have 2 great units rather than one totally stacked and one barely pulling their weight. Chloe, on the other hand, doesn't utilize Sigurd's ring to the fullest either. The extra build is nice to allow her to use Iron Lances without being slowed, but she can often double anyway. The defense doesn't get her much on its own, she's not a great puller so Cantor isn't useful on her, and momentum only applies to her first attack, so she often won't kill on the first hit and will get retaliated on, even if the second strike kills. Chloe is much better served by the 3 Houses DLC ring, which gives her extra strength, weapon sync, shield gambit, and a host of other benefits that synergize with her high speed and class. All that being said, Fire Emblem Engage is still Fire Emblem Engage, and despite all my determination to use Alfred as a growth unit, he simply gets outclassed by units you get later. Even with how much I ended up training him, in Chapter 11 he loses Sigurd's ring, and in Chapter 12 you get access to Bunei, who completely shatters Alfred's stats. Just look at this comparison. 41 health to 35, 15 strength to 14, 20 defense to 16, comparable other stats, and although Alfred has 1 higher speed at this point, Bunei's 4 higher build easily makes up that difference. Add to that 2 weapon types, higher movement, no Master Seal investment, and the Soul Mark being the one with the most restricted amount of deployment slots in the entire game. There's just no reason to use Alfred anymore. At least you can give his super buff Steel Spear to Louis so he doesn't go to waste. Overall, on Maddening difficulty, a properly used Alfred is a fantastic early game unit who makes the first third of the game much easier for you during a time where deployment slots are plentiful enough that pickings for good units are slim, although no matter how hard you try, he will ultimately be outclassed. You know who that sounds like? Binding Blade Marcus, a unit that comfortably sits in S tier in the context of his own game. Use Alfred while he's good, don't even bother promoting him, and then dump him when the time comes. The D tier rankings I've seen are completely out of their minds. Alfred is at minimum a solid B tier unit. And that's all I have. Do leave me a comment, I'm definitely going to read all of them, let me know what you think, and if I changed your mind. If you liked the video, could I ask that you leave me a like, and that's pretty much it. I'll see you next time.